Hey everybody, it's Ela. I paint, watercolor, I knit, and I crochet and do a bunch of other cool stuff. But today I'm going to talk about paper, and I'm going to show you some tests that I like to do on watercolor paper to see how they behave. Now, these are two examples that I did a long time ago, and I show it to my students frequently. And it's a pretty good example of the difference between student grade and professional grade watercolor paper. So this is Strathmore 400 series. This is the cheap paper, and frankly I think this is probably the worst example I've seen of this since I've done other tests. You can see these colors are rather washed out. I don't know how well the camera can pick up all of this, but the paint, first I painted horizontally, let it dry, and then I paint vertically. And when I paint vertically, it actually, the second layer of paint actually resists from the layer underneath in many cases. So you can imagine if you're trying to do multiple washes, how frustrating that would become. Also, I used these colors about as intensely as I could, and like this red looks really washed out. All of these are fairly washed out. For comparison, here is an example for Arch's cold press watercolor paper. So both of these are 140 pound, both of these are cold press, but this is professional quality, and you can see how intense these colors are. You can see how there's absolutely no resistance between the two layers. It just, you put it down and it, bam, it's there. It does exactly what you wanted it to do. So this is a really great illustration of the difference between cheap paper and expensive paper. But, I paint on Arches all the time. I figured it was time for me to at least be curious about some other brands. Don't just lean on one brand and tell all your students that they can't use anything else. That's kind of lame. So I decided, okay, it's time for me to branch out and do this experiment with some other papers. And I got some interesting discoveries as a result. I'm going to show you the cheap ones first, and then I'm going to show you the expensive ones. So this is Canson XL. And you guys have all seen this. It's a light blue pad. They sell it everywhere. It's always on sale at Blick. And the colors are not nearly as faded as the Strathmore 400. The colors show up much better. They're much deeper, much richer. And it's not resisting a little bit right here. I do see a little bit of resistance, and it's interesting because it's like straight across the board resisting, as opposed to just on the edges here and here. But one thing that I found really interesting is that the colors, when you put on that second layer, on these blues in particular, the colors underneath began to bleed into the layers that I was putting on top. And that's a little disturbing. It's like first I thought, is it my fault? Did I not wait long enough? Granted, I did wait a few hours and I hit it with a hairdryer, but it's still bleeding here. And then when I tried to lift the paint, I added that extra bit just to go, okay, if I wanted to do multiple layers, will that first layer stay on? It's kind of like another version of testing for this. Okay, it dissolves when you put the color on top. What about if you just put water on top and try and scrub it off? What happens? And you can see it takes it almost down to the white of the paper. These colors are really lightening up dramatically. So, okay, here's another cheap paper. And this is one that I have a pad of. I like it. I use it. This is fluid watercolor paper. Once again, 140 cold press, just like the other one. And colors look good. Layering is a little better. Don't know why it's getting a little wider there. Once again, let these dry a long time. But then I put a layer of water and scrubbed it off, and you can see it really lifted a lot. Much like this one did. Not quite as bad, but still really lifted easily, dramatically, until you see almost the white of the paper. Okay, so, all right, so those are some cheap papers. What about expensive papers? Well, here we go. This is Fabriano Artistico. This is Arch's biggest competitor in terms of high quality paper. There's very little resistance going on in there. You can layer one color on top of the other, letting the first layer dry. Tiny bit of bleeding, but not very much at all. It seems to be blending very well. And when I tried to scrub off the paint, just getting it wet and scrubbing really hard, it's paler, but not by much. I mean, no comparison, right? It's just a faintly, slightly lighter line as opposed to this that's going almost to the original white of the paper. Big, big difference. So if you're painting layers, this is the one to do. If you think you might want to scrub back your work, this will scrub back, but then, you know, it means that you can only do one color layer, and that would drive me crazy. I would rather have that option to layer than to scrub back as someone who paints frequently. One other example of the scrub back, here we are. This is the Blick cold press paper. This was the most expensive, by the way, and I don't think it's really any better than the Fabriano, even though it cost more. There's a little bit of resistance right in here. Don't know if you can see it between the blue and the yellow. Little bit of bleeding right in here, but you know, nothing serious. Scrubbed back a little, maybe pretty similar. Maybe scrubbed back a little bit more when I tried to. But yeah, these are both examples of artist quality papers and how much darker, how much better they layer, and how much more they resist scrubbing. By the way, the reason why these guys scrub back so dramatically is because of what they call sizing. Sizing is the glue that holds paper together. It's what keeps it from just turning back into a big pile, big mushy mess when you get it wet. It has that glue layer, and it can be either mixed in throughout the paper or it can be painted on top. And when you paint it on top, it prevents that paper from really absorbing the paint. And so then the paint just comes right off. It has that layer of sizing that resists the paint. Whereas more expensive brands, the sizing, that glue, is mixed in with the pulp. The core contains sizing as well as the top, and so it's not just a thick layer on top. The paper actually can actually absorb that paint and, you know, really work the way you want it to, like a watercolor paper. So I'm actually going to demonstrate one more of these. You're going to watch me, and I'll speed it up so you don't have to see the whole process in regular time. You can actually watch it sped up. I'm going to do this on Arch's hot press paper. So this is going to be interesting because Arch's is a professional quality paper, but it's hot press. All these other guys, these are all cold press. They're all rough. They all have texture. It behaves differently. And I have not really gotten the hang of using hot press. I'm definitely much more of a fan of cold press. And I've had some problems with painting and then painting a layer, letting it dry, painting on top, and having that bottom layer lift up, which seems kind of odd to me for an expensive paper. But I'm going to see. I'm going to find out. I'm going to do the test, going to do all the stripes, and see how it behaves. So I painted these lines the night before, let them dry overnight, and now I'm going to sample some colors on top, and we will see how they react to the lines I painted before. I'm going to list these colors as I lay them down. The first one is Cotman Payne's Gray. I use this dark gray a lot when I'm doing shadows. If you want like a really dark, rich color, kind of like a black, but it's cooler, it has a little blue tone to it. Next one is Sennelier's Pure Yellow. Nice bright yellow, good for mixing greens or oranges. Next one is Winsor & Newton Indian Yellow. Kind of a, here I go, mixing it up, making sure it's dissolved. It's a rich golden color, somewhere between an orange and a yellow. Not necessary, but I just love it so much. Here we have Cotman Cadmium Red Deep. Very bright, very pure. Now we have Winsor & Newton's Permanent Carmine. Darker red, more like an alizarin crimson. Next we have Qor Quinacridone Magenta, good for mixing purples, especially if you combine it with ultramarine blue. Next one is Prussian blue, which is similar to phthalo blue but not nearly as bright, a softer greenish blue. And last we have Ultramarine Blue by Winsor and Newton. So let's see, what do we have going on here? I did lay these down really heavy, so there is some bleeding, especially among the yellows. Surprised to see a little bit of resistance going on up here with the yellow and the color underneath. I'm pretty sure that's a Sennelier brand. That's a good quality brand. Sennelier, what's going on? Maybe it's because it's yellow? I don't know. But I'm going to see what happens with the scrub test. This is the big moment of truth right here. Scrubbing, scrubbing, scrubbing the paint away. Scrubbing, scrubbing, will you go away? Scrubbing the paint, will you dissolve? We don't know, we're gonna find out. Yeah, not bad. I'll get my paper towel. We will know for sure. Bam, 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 bam. This is a good test for which colors tend to dissolve easily and which ones do not. We definitely have some dissolving happening here. Not as bad as the cheap, but not as good as the best cold press papers. Not as bad as fluid watercolor. How about compared to Blick? Blick did a little bit better. Fabriano did a little bit better. Yeah, definitely did better. Yeah, it's not the same. Not the same. Yeah, that's the Canson, that's the cheap one. So I'd put it somewhere in the middle. Not as bad as the worst ones, but not as good as the best. See, the ultimate test is now I got to do this with the arches. Let's try this out now. This is old. It's been drying for a long time. The paints are not identical, but will it lift? Definitely has a head start. Oh boy. Will it lift? Little bit. Check it out. It did. Once again, this was allowed to dry for a few years. This I did yesterday, but it still lifts a little bit. But that's pretty damn good. If you have enjoyed this experiment, if you would like to see more watercolor experiments, knitting, crochet, cooking, other fun subjects, things that I like to do in my daily life and record, please like and subscribe. You can also go to my website. I have all sorts of articles, recipes, examples of paintings that I've done in the past. That's down in the link below. I also have my Instagram page. You can see all the cool stuff that I've been doing over the past few years. Hope you enjoyed this, and see you next time.